whole entire fucking world, cause world wars and blood races and diamond wars and all this other shit, selling guns and ammo to each other. Fuck you. Fuck the rich white man. That's all I have to say. Sorry, guys. Somebody should say it. I have reality. I wish I didn't have it, but I actually do. I actually have reality. You know what I'm saying? I have reality. You don't. You think that because you live in America and what your grandfathers did to the slaves and what your grandfathers did to the Trail of Tears and Native Americans and all this other stupid shit, Columbus Day parades about how you killed 1 million people or caused the Trail of Tears. Some of us actually have a brain and won't back your fucking conquistadorialism, your fucking rape of everyone else who isn't a rich white man, including the women. And no, I won't do it. I won't do it. I'm not playing around on YouTube trying to get a response from somebody. I don't want a response. The comments are turned off. I don't care what the fuck you say. I'm not wrong. I'm sick of the rich white man and I'd kill him. Man, you know how some people, like some Nazis really hated the Jew? I really hate the rich white man and I would subvert and destroy it in every single fucking way. And sure, you can come take away my home, kill my family like you've tried to do before, or try to kill me, Mr. Rich White Man, or stick me in jail 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 28 times, like you've done all throughout my life, Rich White Man. But it doesn't matter. When it comes down to it, I'm a bear arms against you. I'm not bearing arms against Africa or Chinese or Russia or, you know, whatever the fuck that you want to go fight or like fucking Israel, Palestine. No. I'll kill the rich white man. I'll kill the rich white man. Anyone else is my friend. You are the enemy. I'll kill the rich white man, and I'm dead serious about this. If given the chance, I would kill the rich white man. You ever formed a Republican hunting committee before? Because I have. Let's hunt me some Republicans with high-power rifles, you know? Let's hunt some Republicans. You know, the people who sold the world and promoted racism and slavery and World War I and World War II and the Vietnam War and 9/11 when the rich white man killed 3,600 of your own people in a fucking explosion in your own building. Yeah. I'm supposed to hate the Israel Palestines. Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to hate them so much. But no, I hate the rich white man, and I'll fucking say it. No one else in the world will say it, and I hope they do kill me, because what they've left of my life after I fuck with them all my life isn't worth a spit. It isn't worth even speaking of. The light that's left after the rich white man got a hold of it isn't even worth mentioning on this stream. So, after you got done with it, with your prison industrial complex, your judgment about drugs, your prison system, your fucking court judges, and your fucking rich, white, fucking privileged bullshit passing judgment on me because I smoked some drugs, while in the meantime, you pretty much, like, conquistadorially raped the entire rest of the fucking planet, I'd say, yeah, what's my enemy? The rich white man. So now I'm rolling down Rodeo with a shotgun. These white people ain't seen a brown-skinned man since their grandparents bought one. So now I'm rolling down Rodeo with a rocket launcher. These people never seen a real SJW till I fucking killed every rich white man. And I'm dead serious too. And I'm not doing this for some fucking crazy crusade for some other race or something like that. I'm talking about truth and problems, right? The truth is, the rich white man conquistadorially raped the entire fucking world, and now we got problems. And I know I'm the only one with the balls to fucking say it, but fuck you up your stupid rich white man fucking anus, and fuck your bullshit, and fuck your world wars, and fuck World War II, and fuck Vietnam, and fuck Afghanistan, and fuck 9/11, and fuck the rich white man, and fuck America, and fuck everything that came with it. Fuck it. And please do come kill me. It would be an absolute fucking, it would be a boon to take me away from the ravages of what the rich white man did to this world. Please take me away from it. It would be very much a relief. End it with a high power rifle from across the street like you do everybody else. And it would be it would be it would be a boon. It would be a a favor to get me away from you. Yeah, I don't want you. I don't want your houses. I don't want this house. I don't want anything you had to do with it. I don't want this country and all the rape and the Trail of Tears that you did to get it. I don't want anything to have to do with it. America to me is the rich white man, and that's the enemy. You want me to go fight the Chinese and the Russians? Those are my brothers, you know, the Middle East and all this stuff. Nah, I think of all the enemies in the world, and we got Gargamel and the rich white man. You know what I'm saying? Not Gargamel, like, you know, like, I'm saying, like, what else? You know, what's a good example? Trump. We got Trump and the rich white man. We got Trump and the rich white man. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to this entire world or anybody who lived on the world. It's the rich white man, and I'm sorry, I'll say it. I'll say it right to your fucking face. I have no qualms about it. You can come kill me. I don't have anything to lose after I was done dealing with the rich white man. So come kill me, please. Yeah, come kill me, please. I've got nothing left after the rich white man raped everybody, every girl I've ever been with. The rich white man raped every girl I've ever been with. Fucked my family, killed my family. Trail of Tears, then 9/11, then fucking, you know, Afghanistan, then fucking Vietnam, their way through the last 50 years and shit. And I'm sorry, but you just don't have my fucking support, you fucking shithead rich white wasp cocksucking traitors. And I'll say it right to your fucking face. Get the fuck out of here now. I don't know where you go, but I really want you to feel the ravages of what you did to Palestine and the Jews. So I say, I hope the rich white man doesn't have a home for 2,000 years like the Jewish man had. I hope the same things that the rich white man did to the Jew happen to the rich white man. That would be that'd be what God wishes. I would say God would want you to face the exact same things that you shelled out to everybody else. So I'll say what God will probably say. I hope the rich white man faces the same consequences that he forced on everybody else. And I'll say it very clearly. And I hope you do kill me. Fuck you, traitor. You killed your own race. You killed your own country. You killed every other race on the fucking planet. You caused world wars with what? Vietnam and fucking Germany and fucking, you know, fucking, like, Jesus fucking Christ. What in the literal fuck is wrong with my entire race? And I'm done with it. I screamed on stage for 15 years before I ever stood on mic here. So, like, understand, it's not some new fangled thing. I used to stand on stage and scream about the ravages of the rich white man shooting the black man in the back 45 times in the back in Harlem for reaching for his wallet. Our band was named Deaf to Reason because I don't want to hear what you have to say. You're the enemy. You understand it? I got fucking blocks over my ears. Our name was Deaf to Reason because I'm deaf to your reason, Mr. White Man. All you want to do is rape everybody and kill everybody else. So I'm deaf to your fucking reason. Yeah, I'm deaf to your reason. I got no reason for the white man. Sorry. White man says... He says that God is a white man. And I'm going to leave it at that. Sorry for the vitriol, but I really hate the conquistadorialism in this world, and I would traitor my own race if I could and kill them. I've never wanted to fight anybody like the rich white man. Not rapists, not Nazis, not fucking some fucking weird idea about Vietnamese or Koreans or anything like that, or anything the rich white man told you to do over the last 100 years. I really want to chase the rich white man with high power rifles and grenades across the land like he did to everybody else but himself. I really wish the rich white man saw the comeuppance and the mirror damage of what he did to the rest of the world. You get chased with M79s and 5.56 across the rest of the world until they nuclear bomb you. Until they nuclear bomb Martha's Vineyard. Like you did Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know? I hope they nuclear bomb Martha's Vineyard and y'all actually face some fucking some actual comeuppance for your crimes, instead of just laughing your way to the child molestation bank in the Cayman Islands, where you hang around with your demon bankers fucking the entire world and their fucking ass, including children. Yeah, I'd like to kill you. Yeah. And I mean this. You want to know why I have no friends and no life and nothing? Because I can't be friends with anybody who's white anymore. Not even my own family. Watching them do it, I think I'm the only sane person left in my race. And that's where we're at. Sorry, guys. I mean, that's where we're at. I think I'm the only sane white person left. I really do believe this. I look at the damage that my own race caused, and I'm like, oh, Jesus fucking Christ. I would kill you if I could. You killed the entire world. It's what you deserve.
British double dealing went a long way to perpetuate the conflict in Palestine.
At the end of the day, when you're fighting a war, you are very liberal in what you're offering in terms of a post-war settlement. When you get down to the conference table when the war has ended, and you have to start honouring your agreements, you then have to decide what's in your interest or not, which is all the Middle East as the Western flag for their power in India and their power nation.
The story of Britain's involvement in the Middle East and the ensuing struggle between Arab and Jew begins with her colonial past. At the beginning of the 20th century, King Edward VII ruled over a vast empire, interests in every part of the world.
India became increasingly
Conquistadorialism.
important because it was the second pillar of British power in the world. Moving the Indian Army about was extremely important in extending British interests and British influence across the globe. And the Suez Canal was, of course, the quick way to do that. It's very important for the British geopolitical position to ensure the Suez Canal remains safe and secure.
With this aim in mind, Britain had become the only European power to establish a major foothold in the Middle East, in the principalities around the Persian Gulf, in Aden, and in Egypt. Britain had annexed Egypt from Turkey's Ottoman Empire in 1882, and by the time it was made a protectorate in 1914, Cairo had become the center of British power in the Middle East. The presence of imperial troops in the region was of vital strategic importance, for the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Muhammad V was in alliance with Britain's much-feared rival, Germany. Together with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, these countries made up the Central Powers, and pitted against them were the three allies, Britain, France, and Russia. From the Ottoman capital, Constantinople in Turkey, the Sultan ruled over the last of the great Islamic empires. It had been in almost terminal decline for decades. Yet the fate of the Ottoman Empire was to be sealed by the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914. In Europe, Germany's rapid advance was halted by Britain and France along the Western Front. In the east, Russia's war against Germany and Austria-Hungary also reached deadlock. The powerful weapons of the industrial age were killing thousands of men in the trenches of every army.
All of the leading powers expected the war to be over within a matter of months. So in that sense, all of them are surprised at the end of 1914, when not merely is the war going on, but it shows every sign of being likely to go on for a very long time. At that point, they begin to think about new ways of winning the war.
Britain's Prime Minister Asquith felt that with the stalemate in Europe, it was essential to widen the conflict. Together with Foreign Secretary Lord Grey, Minister for War Lord Kitchener, and the First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill, they masterminded a complex strategy to undermine the Central Powers.
This was a global war, and the British saw the Middle East very much in a global context. The traditional British preference for sideshows, as people unfavorably call it, the indirect strategy, the way of attacking the soft underbelly, as Churchill called it, of the enemy. And the soft underbelly was seen to be Turkey.
Britain's secret plan involved, on the one hand, a military diversion, and on the other, a devious use of diplomacy through bribery, subversion, and double-dealing. All these devices focused on the enemy's weakest link, Turkey's Ottoman Empire.
Diplomacy in general has always had a secret dimension to it, but where discretion ends and conspiracy begins is an open question. But during the period up to and during the First World War, there was a particularly intense set of negotiations and discussions between the major imperial powers, between the French, the Russians, and the British in particular, cutting in the Italians as well, about what would they do when the war was over and when the Ottoman Empire broke up.
The British government hoped that by striking a deal over the spoils of war, it would strengthen the alliance against the Central Powers. Amongst the Allies, Russia had long sought access to the Mediterranean. In a secret treaty of March 1915, Britain and France offered what was to the Tsar a prize of vital geopolitical importance: Constantinople.
It is that key outlet into the wider world and into the Mediterranean. And it is the one thing, of course, the British and the French have been attempting to prevent the Russians from achieving. So this is a complete volte-face. This is the British, the French and the Russians coming to an agreement over something which was, up to this point, almost inconceivable.
Italy's King Vittorio Emanuele was another target for bribery. Britain, France and Russia tried to tempt Italy, a pro-German state, to join the Allies. In April 1915, a secret treaty offered Italy a substantial bit of Ottoman real estate in Anatolia.
Again, it's another power coming into the equation and being offered territorial advancement which in normal circumstances would have been quite inconceivable.
The bribe worked. Italy joined the Allies and declared war on the Central Powers in August 1915. But Britain's strategy to undermine the enemy via the Ottoman Empire also required subversion. By using domestic opposition to weaken, maybe even destroy it, Britain exploited a new movement sweeping through the empire: nationalism.
Nationalism in the sense of believing that there are peoples with a clear cultural identity and that these people should live independent. That idea spread to the Middle East as to other parts of the world in the latter part of the 19th century. So you had the beginnings in the Ottoman Empire of a Turkish nationalism.
This came to a head when the Young Turks took power in a coup in 1908 and started to impose their language and culture on the Arabs of the empire. But this only reawakened an interest amongst Arabs in their own heritage. A 1,000 years before, Arabs had brought the technology and literature of the East to the West, and their religion, Islam, had encompassed much of Asia, North Africa, and southwestern Europe. The idea of recovering that historic grandeur had remained in the consciousness of Arab intellectuals. By the start of the First World War, the antagonism between Arab and Turk had increased.
The very fact that the Turks were saying, we want to have a unified empire, meant the Arabs said, wait a minute, we're not part of this. So all of this literary and nationalistic revival then took a much more political form, and therefore you got the emergence of Arab nationalism.
They had arrived at the conclusion that remaining in the Ottoman Empire was becoming hopeless, that they couldn't actually share power with the Turks. And they began thinking of having their own state.
By the summer of 1915, British intelligence confirmed that the Arab nationalist movement was the breakthrough the government was looking for. Britain and her French ally dispatched officers to sound out Arab leaders.
Both the French and the British started, you could say, seducing various local Arab leaders that if you side with us, we'll give you your independence. So why don't you leave the Ottomans? And various people were tempted as a result. If they thought they could actually gain independence, why not side with the Europeans against the Ottomans?
The idea was to tempt the Arabs into a revolt against their Ottoman overlords and create a diversion which would tie down the Central Powers in the Middle East. Ironically, the impetus for such a diversion had come not from London, but from the Arab world. In the Hijaz, in western Arabia, Sharif Hussein, its ruler, was set on extending his political and geographical domain. He believed he might be able to do it with the help of the British. In turn, the British were impressed by Sharif Hussein's family credentials as custodians of the holy places of Islam.
They called themselves Hashemites. They're called the family Hashemites because that's the family or the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad. They were the Bani Hashim, the sons of Hashim. So Sharif Hussein was the leader of the Hashemites. He was the person responsible for Mecca and Medina. And although he had worked with the Ottomans before the First World War, once the First World War happened, he saw this was his chance.
A chance, too, for the British, who saw support for Sharif Hussein as a way to threaten the Sultan's hold on the Caliphate, the political leadership of the Islamic world.
The British, because they were fighting the Ottomans, and the Ottomans were claiming to be the real representative of Islam, they wanted a counterforce. And the counterforce was represented by Sharif Hussein, being a descendant of the Prophet. But Sharif Hussein was speaking of liberating Arab lands, building a new national state. He wanted to be king of the Arabs, not simply of Arabians.
In July 1915, Sharif Hussein smuggled a message to the British High Commissioner in Cairo, Sir Henry McMahon, offering to raise a substantial Arab force against the Ottomans in return for British support for Arab independence. In the ensuing secret correspondence between the two men, Sharif Hussein was given to understand that he could expect British support in achieving some of his ambitions in the event of an Ottoman defeat. This letter of October the 26th, 1915, outlined the main points of the arrangement.
The actual document itself is absolutely riven with ambiguity. There's no doubt about that. The question is whether Hussein recognizes that. My sense of Hussein is that he does recognize it. In other words, there is no wool being pulled over his eyes because he's perfectly aware that if he's going to create a modern Arab empire, he's going to need some logistical, economic development, and that can only come from the outside world.
Taking Britain's assurances of support at face value, Hussein, together with his sons Faisal and Abdullah, amassed a sizable force. The new army was commanded by the young and charismatic Faisal, who had captured the imagination of the Arab masses in the quest for Arab independence. Yet even as Hussein and Faisal mobilized their troops, the British were preparing to sell them short. Back in London, in the spring of 1916, Britain was negotiating with France about the future shape of the Middle East. Behind closed doors, Sir Mark Sykes of the British Foreign Office had been meeting his French opposite number, Francois-Georges Picot. Britain knew it was vital to offer the French a stake in the spoils of the Ottoman Empire, should they win the war.
There was an awareness on the British side that they had made such huge sacrifices that one couldn't just ignore French ambitions, and that the French were determined to have their historical peace of the Levant.
Poring over a map of the Levant, Sykes and Picot personally drew in the areas they wished to see under their control. Their secret deal amounted to the virtual carve-up of the Middle East. In Area A for the French and Area B for the British, the imperialists intended to exercise power indirectly. They would appoint advisors and take charge of the finances in their respective spheres of influence. Then there was the area coloured blue, which was to be directly controlled by France. This included what was then known as Greater Syria, where the French traditionally had commercial and religious interests. As for the area coloured pink, known as Iraq, with its strategic ports, railways and oil, this was to be under British rule. The area coloured yellow represented Palestine and was envisaged as an international zone, except for Haifa. For Haifa did Palestine rail as for the where by France their secret
Levant on the British side that they had made such huge sacrifices that one couldn't just ignore French ambitions, and that the French were determined to have their historical peace of the Levant.
Poring over a map of the Levant, Sykes and Picot personally drew in the areas they wished to see under their control. Their secret deal amounted to the virtual carve-up of the Middle East. In Area A for the French and Area B for the British, the imperialists intended to exercise power indirectly. They would appoint advisors and take charge of the finances in their respective spheres of influence. Then there was the area coloured blue, which was to be directly controlled by France. This included what was then known as Greater Syria, where the French traditionally had commercial and religious interests. As for the area coloured pink, known as Iraq, with its strategic ports, railways and oil, this was to be under British rule. The area coloured yellow represented Palestine and was envisaged as an international zone, except for Haifa.
What the British wanted was the oil of Iraq, and they concentrated on getting Iraq and getting away from Iraq to the Mediterranean in order to transport this oil. So they got Haifa on the Palestinian coast, and they got most of Iraq.
The Sykes-Picot agreement was a pretty shameful document, and I wouldn't attempt to defend it. But it was drawn up by people who were sort of operating under the old kind of balance of power considerations in an imperial frame of mind.
Unaware of these secret dealings behind their backs, Hussein and Faisal proclaimed independence and in June 1916 attacked the Turkish troops. The Arab revolt against the Ottomans had begun. The Turkish garrison at Mecca was soon overrun and the seaport at Jeddah seized. By 1917, Hussein and Faisal's forces had pushed north and engaged the Ottoman Turks along the Hijaz Railway. The British saw the Arab revolt as part of its strategy for creating a military diversion against the Central Powers. In a pincer movement, Britain had launched a campaign from the southwest to ensure control of the Suez Canal and the Levant. And from the southeast, it was fighting to secure the oil wells of Iraq. All this to attack the Central Powers at their weakest point. the Ottoman Empire.
The Arabs hitched their fortunes to the British. They considered themselves to be fighting with the Allies. But at the same time, they were not merged into the British Army, that they continued to act as an independent army called the Northern Army.
While the Arab army advanced northwards, Britain's General Allenby had crossed the Suez Canal, and by the spring of 1917, his forces had reached the frontier of Palestine. The war in Europe, however, was still not going well for Britain. The attempted push through the German lines at the Somme had produced little territorial gain, and the cost in lives was colossal. In London, there had been a change of leadership. The new Prime Minister, Lloyd George, felt that the Allied war effort needed a fresh impetus. Although America had so far been neutral in the war, Lloyd George was convinced that could be changed. He believed there was one powerful group which might influence the American government.
Lloyd George thought that the American decision whether to join or not would depend critically on public opinion, and that Jewish support could tilt the scales in one direction or the other.
You've got to remember that the British Foreign Office greatly overestimated the political power of international Jewry, particularly the wealthy, financial and commercial Jewish elites.
What is extraordinary about this situation is that here you have, particularly the British, seeing the Jewish world as one collective monolithic entity. And in that sense, they start looking at the role of the Jews in the war as being something which might be important. And from the point of view of the Allies, something else quite remarkable, this monolithic collective entity is pro-German.
Many Jews in the upper echelons of German society did indeed have close connections to the Kaiser's Foreign Office. A new Jewish nationalist movement, Zionism, had also been able to establish its headquarters in Berlin. Zionism had originated in the 1880s after Theodor Herzl published a book espousing the virtues of a Jewish state. This caused a sensation amongst Jewish intellectuals in Germany, Austria and Russia, who shared Herzl's outrage at the escalation of anti-Jewish sentiments.
The end of the 19th century saw the rise of anti-Semitism all over Europe, in Austria, in Germany, in France, but particularly in Eastern Europe, in Poland and in Russia. And the pogrom against the Jews in Russia gave rise to the establishment of FFXIITZA, the Lovers of Zion, societies in a number of Russian cities who started to promote and to finance and to sponsor colonization, emigration to Palestine. Herzl came to the conclusion that the Jews were not safe anywhere in Europe, and the only solution was for the Jews to have a state of their own over which they could exercise sovereignty and where they would not be a minority.
What had also given Zionism its appeal was the way in which it fitted in to historic Jewish aspirations. Scattered throughout the world, since the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in the 1st century AD, many Jews had cherished the idea of returning one day to what their scriptures had told them was the Promised Land. In fact, there had already been a small community of indigenous Jews in Palestine. But even when some European Jews established settlements throughout the late 19th century, the whole Jewish community by 1914 constituted barely 8% of the population. The Zionist leader in Britain, Chaim Weizmann, had been lobbying the government for a guarantee that in the event of an Ottoman defeat, it would support Jewish emigration to Palestine. By early 1917, Lloyd George's view of Jews as globally influential convinced him that Zionism was another nationalist movement which should be co-opted to the Allied cause. In March, Mark Sykes began negotiations with Weizmann.
There is a bee in the bonnet of people like Mark Sykes that actually the Jews do ultimately look to each other and look to their own interest. And if that interest, as they are being told by Weizmann, is what we really want is Palestine, they're prepared to believe it. They're prepared to go along with it.
As negotiations with Weizmann continued over the following months, the war deteriorated rapidly for the Allies. The German submarine campaign was seriously weakening Britain's merchant fleet. And although America had entered the war on the Allied side, President Woodrow Wilson was not yet willing to supply a significant number of troops. Britain's latest attempt to keep up the pressure on the Western Front soon became bogged down in the muddy trenches of Passchendaele. As thousands of young men's lives were wasted in another fruitless campaign, morale amongst the soldiers plummeted. But the most serious threat to the Allied war machine came from the east. Russia was on the verge of collapse. After massive defeats at the hands of the Germans, the war-weary country was disintegrating, with food shortages, strikes, and demonstrations. When the Tsar was deposed in a revolution, Britain and France became greatly alarmed.
The point is that once Russia and its war effort begins to collapse, essentially the Germans have won the First World War unless they bring the Americans in. There's no way that the British and the French on their own are ever going to defeat Germany.
In October, the British government received an intelligence report suggesting that Jews were a significant influence in the leadership of the Bolshevik Party, the new revolutionary movement emerging as the dominant force in Russia. Lloyd George feared that these communists would take Russia out of the war. With the Americans still refusing to commit sufficient forces, he knew it was time to act. He instructed his Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, to issue a pledge to capture the hearts and minds of the Jewish people.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievements of this object.
The Balfour Declaration was issued on November 2nd, 1917, just as British forces were occupying Palestine.
I would say that the Balfour Declaration has to be understood not as an idealistic gesture, but it has to be understood within the framework of British imperial policy, and Lloyd George was the main instigator of that declaration because he believed that it would serve Britain's interests.
But this was also the first time that any major European power had given official backing for the Zionist goal of making Palestine into a Jewish homeland. Yet Sharif Hussein had understood that Palestine had been promised as part of his deal for Arab independence. Anticipating Arab outrage at the prospect of a Jewish homeland in a largely Arab province, the Balfour Declaration had also stated that
Nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
The declaration, nonetheless, appeared to indicate British support for Jewish emigration.
There were only a mere 80,000 out of some like 700,000 people in Palestine who were Jews. The indigenous inhabitants of Palestine were referred to as non-Jewish inhabitants, and that Palestine was being identified even at that stage as a Jewish land, and all the others had no defined identity. They were simply non-Jewish.
The Balfour Declaration was what it says, a declaration. It wasn't a treaty, it wasn't a signed agreement, it was a declaration in support of the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
In fact, the only treaty Britain had signed in regard to Palestine was with the French, the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement. On November the 7th, within a few days of the Balfour Declaration, the Bolsheviks took power in Russia. Lloyd George hoped that it would have the desired effect of appeasing the Jews in the communist leadership.
What is it that they supposedly so want, as Jews? Palestine. Now, the whole argument is totally illogical. It's a nonsense argument because these particular people, if one were to think of people like Trotsky or Zinoviev or Yaffe, some of the key Jewish leaders in the Russian Revolution, the November Revolution, these people, of course, are internationalists.
There were 15 to 20 Jews in the higher echelons of the Bolshevik party. Most of them were anti-Zionist, and after they came to power, soon after they came to power, they issued a declaration to say that Zionism is a capitalist ploy, a capitalist idea.
The wildly inaccurate intelligence report on which Lloyd George based his strategy was to have major implications for Britain. Within weeks, Russia's new leaders did exactly the opposite of what he had expected. Not only did they pull out of the war, they opened up the archives of the Tsarist Foreign Office and published the secret treaties. The very treaties Britain had engineered with her allies to carve up the Ottoman Empire, and to which Russia had been privy.
That, of course, is a very great embarrassment to the Western Allies, because the Allies have been doing all sorts of deals behind the scenes in which they have handed out to each other large sections of the world, meanwhile openly preaching that they are fighting the war in defense of democracy, and of course also telling, among others, the Arabs, that they are supporters of self-determination for the peoples of the Ottoman Empire.
Publication of the secret treaties by the Bolsheviks certainly created enormous suspicion in the Arab world, and this meant that the Sharif Hussein and the others said, wait a minute, what's going on? Why are you not giving us independence? And secondly, why are you dividing us up into Zone A and Zone B? And at that point, of course, the Arabs realized that not only had the British got their own particular interests, for example, in the ports of Palestine or in Iraq, but that they had promised other things to the French.
Amid Arab confusion and suspicion, General Allenby entered Jerusalem on foot, together with Sykes, Picot, and a number of other Allied notables. His British-led forces had captured the Holy City in December 1917. The leaders of the Arab revolt, however, were nowhere to be seen. Fearing that Hussein and Faisal might lose heart, the British government forwarded a message to them, reiterating British commitment to Arab independence.
The Arab race shall be given full opportunity of once again forming a nation in the world. This can only be achieved by the Arabs themselves uniting, and Great Britain and her allies will pursue a policy with this ultimate unity in view.
Hussein stayed loyal to the Allied cause, still prepared to accept Britain's word on Arab independence, although he spoke of settling accounts after the war. From Allenby's point of view, he continued to rely on Arab support in the war against the Ottomans. But now that Jerusalem had been occupied by the British, one party seized the initiative. In April 1918, Chaim Weizmann and the International Zionist Commission traveled to Palestine to lay the foundation for a Hebrew university. Their hope was that it would become the intellectual hub of Zionism. Weizmann's visit, however, caused widespread alarm and indignation among the Arab population. And when he and the chief rabbi of Jerusalem met General Allenby, it looked as if Britain was preparing to honor the Balfour Declaration. Six months later, Allenby's forces entered Damascus. With their ally, Faisal's Northern Army, they had pushed the Ottoman troops north through Palestine into Syria.
The Arab revolt did contribute to the victory of the Allies. First of all, it protected the British flank in Palestine. Second, it kept a number of Turkish and German troops preoccupied. And third, the British could have never legitimized what they were doing unless they had the blessing of a particular Arab force.
On the 3rd of October, the people of Damascus flocked to Faisal's victory parade. If he was to seize power, he knew it was of great importance to make his presence felt and to be seen by the Arab people as their liberator. Later the same day, however, Faisal met with General Allenby at the Victoria Hotel in Damascus. Allenby warned him that his rule in Syria would be limited.
The British, by that time, knew that they were going to hand over Syria to the French. So they couldn't actually accept Faisal as a legitimate ruler. All they could do is to pay him his salary and the expenses of his army and his administration.
Undaunted by Allenby's warnings, Faisal assumed the title of governor of Damascus. With the support of his father, Sheriff Hussein, he set about creating a power base for their goal of an independent Arab state. On the 31st of October, the Ottomans were finally defeated. And at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November 1918, the guns fell silent in Europe as the war with the Central Powers came to an end. The peace conference at Versailles began in January 1919. Representatives of the victorious Allies, such as the French Prime Minister Clemenceau and the American President Woodrow Wilson, gathered to sort out what was to be done with the former territories of the defeated empires. Now, the liberal use of promises by the British government had to be prioritized.
They did indeed make pledges to the Arabs, but they also made pledges to the Jews. And they also made pledges to the French and the Russians and everybody else. And these people saw the world as an imperial world. Not only did they want to carve out the Middle East, they wanted to carve out Russia. They thought this was the last great moment in which the imperial powers would be able to sit down and grab what was going, particularly since there was no one to stop them.
But Britain and her old ally France were up against the American President Woodrow Wilson's vision of a new world order which promoted national self-determination.
Once independence had seemed to be a possibility, that this principle of self-determination, supported by the Americans, was going to be offered to all those who were to be liberated from former empires like the Habsburgs and the Ottomans. What the Palestinians wanted was an independent state.
In fact, Faisal had come from Damascus to plead the Arab cause. But the future of Palestine and the Middle East formed part of Britain's pledge to France in the Sykes-Picot carve-out. In the event, Woodrow Wilson's principles about self-determination were forgotten when it came to the people of the Middle East. Britain and France were free to go ahead with their agreement. But what of the promises Britain had made to the Jews regarding Palestine? Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, in a confidential memo during the Versailles peace talks with America, France, and Italy, wrote,
"The four great powers are committed to Zionism, and Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes, of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land."
That might sound like a warm endorsement of Zionism, yet further in the post-war memorandum, Balfour hints at a much more cynical agenda.
So far as Palestine is concerned, the powers have made no declaration of policy, which at least in letter, they have not always intended to violate.
The Versailles Peace Conference was concluded on June the 28th, 1919, with the creation of the League of Nations, the first global institution for peace and security. Its covenant provided that the Arab and other territories ceded by the defeated Ottoman Empire should be administered by mandates, which meant, in effect, that Britain and France were given the authority to impose their rule over the Arab territories. On November the 21st, 1919, François-Georges Picot, the co-architect of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the French General Gouraud arrived in Beirut. And so began the imposition of the French mandate for Syria and Lebanon. The British forces, who had occupied the region since ousting the Ottoman Turks during the last months of the war, were handing over power to the French, thus fulfilling their wartime pledge. Faisal, who had been the governor of Damascus now for 16 months, had been consolidating his position. When he was proclaimed king by the Syrian National Congress, the French were incensed, and General Gouraud sent in his troops. By August the 7th, 1920, Faisal had been deposed and had to flee to Palestine. The promises to Sharif Hussein and Faisal of a single independent state were now a distant memory for the Europeans.
The whole issue of spheres of influence meant that what was at first appeared to be a willingness to accept a single Arab state was in fact seriously diluted. And then on top of that, of course, the very fact of there being a French area and a British area meant that in effect this was the seed of partition. So you had both independence was denied, but also the unity of this area was denied.
The boundaries and governments of the Middle Eastern states that emerged bore the unmistakable imprint of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The French half of the previously Ottoman province of Greater Syria became the mandate for Lebanon and Syria. The other half became the British mandate for Transjordan and Palestine. In the east, the Ottoman area of Mesopotamia, which included the oil fields of Mosul, was given to Britain as the mandate for Iraq.
So this was basically the importance of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, to divide what is called the Fertile Crescent between Iraq and Syria and let Britain get access to the oil of the area and be able to exploit it in the future.
But British rule was initially rejected by the Iraqi people until Faisal was installed as king in July 1921. Britain hoped the limited power it devolved to him would serve to placate the frustrated demands for Arab independence. But Sharif Hussein expected more from the British.
He never gave up the idea that the British had promised him independence, not only in Arabia, but in Syria and Iraq as well. And he wanted the British to fulfill their promises.
Sharif Hussein's dream of an Arab kingdom ruled by the Hashemites was only partially fulfilled. For although his other son, Abdullah, became king of Transjordan, their old rival, Ibn Saud, swept the Hashemites out of Hijaz when he conquered the whole of the Arabian Peninsula. In Jerusalem, an administration was established by the British in the spring of 1920. There were no plans for devolving power in Palestine. Palestine was a land sacred to three religions. Jews were a small minority who had lived harmoniously with Christians and the much larger community of Muslims for hundreds of years. But the Balfour Declaration, promising Jews a homeland in Palestine, had been incorporated into the British Mandate at Versailles. Palestine was thus to be open for new European Jewish immigration. With celebrations and parades in support of Zionist activities, it seemed as if the British were going to honor their pledges to the Jews and ignore Palestinian hopes of independence.
The Arabs had a strong case, but very poor advocates. The Zionists had a case. It wasn't as strong as that of the local Arabs, but they had brilliant advocates. Zionism is one of the greatest public relations success stories of the 20th century, and Chaim Weizmann exemplified these traditional Jewish skills of advocacy and persuasion.
Some of these skills were clearly in evidence when Weizmann and various Zionist groups helped finance land purchases and the building of settlements for immigrant Jews. At the same time, political and security organizations were created to support the emerging Jewish homeland. The Arab community in Palestine was incensed.
The Palestinians couldn't conceive their country being divided or given away to another community which had nothing to do with the Middle East in the first place and was almost wholly European at the time. So to them, it seemed absurd that 600 to 700,000 should give up their land, their homes, their villages, their towns, and hand them over to a minority which was dispersed throughout Palestine. And Palestine, after all, is named after its people, who are the Palestinians.
In 1925, Arthur Balfour toured the new Jewish settlements in Palestine. Although he was fated as a hero of the Zionist cause, the immigration of European Jews was to have unforeseen consequences for British rule in Palestine.
I believe that the Balfour Declaration was one of the most serious mistakes in British imperial history. It committed Britain to support of Jewish nationalism in Palestine after the war, and it did not produce any immediate benefits for Britain.
Without the Balfour Declaration, there could have been no genuine development of a Jewish national home, and the follow-through in 1948, where you get the creation of a State of Israel, simply would not have happened. It requires the umbrella of the British to be there, in effect, to support the emerging Jewish national home militarily at the bottom line. The very fact that there are British troops, British policemen there to protect the Jewish communities is ultimately central to the situation. It could not have been done in any other way.
Throughout the 1930s and 40s, the years of Nazi persecution and the Holocaust, Jewish immigration to Palestine increased rapidly. But what was seen by the Arabs as an alien incursion and the Jews as a fulfillment of historic rights led to polarization and violence. In response to terrorist acts by Arabs, Britain restricted the immigration, but the policy only stimulated Jewish terrorism. Against this background, Britain relinquished its mandate, and the State of Israel was born in 1948. When the first of several wars between the new state and its Arab neighbors began, thousands of Palestinian Arabs fled their homeland. Thus, the strategies employed by Britain to win the First World War inadvertently left a deep divide between Arab and Jew.
The most serious consequences of British policy during the war was the encouragement of Arab nationalism and Jewish nationalism. And in the aftermath of the First World War, Britain was left with this legacy of double dealing and of betrayal, which was to haunt her for a long, long time.
Clearly, it played a role in dividing the Arab world into different states, in allowing the establishment of the State of Israel, and in frustrating Arab desires. But if what happened in Sykes-Picot and everything else that happened in the First World War is used as an excuse for the problems of the Middle East now, I think that would be a mistake. But yes, the roots of what we see today certainly arose from the double dealing of the First World War and from the frustrated expectations of that time.
And that's how the white man starts every single war that we've ever had. Oh, it's true, but he shouldn't say it. Did the white man start every single war we've ever had in the history of the human race? Oh no, did the white man start every single war we've ever had in the fucking human race? Yeah. Is white man Darth Vader? Oh, did you start us in this world war again, white man? I'm just kidding. I like self-racism. I really don't care what people think. I don't care what they think. I really don't. I don't care what they think. I don't care what you think, Mr. Rich White Man.
I have been playing multiplayer games religiously since I was a shitty little squeaker boy. You see, one day I moved to a country where I could finally have access to a most hallowed and fabled thing, the internet. Suddenly a whole new world was revealed to my underdeveloped little mind. Counter-Strike, Team Fortress 2, Unreal Tournament, Halo 2. I was instantly hooked. My tiny child brain could not have fathomed the world of possibility that the internet would open up for me when it came to gaming. I'd already fallen in love with single-player titles. Half-Life 1 was the first game I ever played from start to finish, and Combat Evolved was my first ever console game. So you could say I was already in too deep not to be sinking. Multiplayer, however, it changed everything. See, I was always really antisocial. Not out of some awkwardness in my own nature or an inability to make friends or communicate. If anything, I have literally no shame and am near incapable of feeling social anxiety. It was more a case of I have always been very picky with who my friends are. The internet changed this. Suddenly, I was hopping from lobby to lobby, making friends with everyone, from fellow squeakers like myself, mics peaking every shrill cry and swear, to people 3 times my age, juggling their free time so they could get one more game on Halo before the wife got back home with the kids. This was, quite frankly, a golden age. From full Xbox parties on COD, where everyone was discovering a plethora of new mother-related insults, to entire weekends wasted on Halo custom games with the boys. Infection, Fat Man, Jenga. If your brain could think it, the community would have already made it. To this day, there has never been a more welcoming and fun atmosphere in online gaming, at least in my experience. I still cherish many of the memories I made playing in these lobbies, and some of the people I met I am still friends with to this day. So when did it all go wrong? When did all of what made multiplayer enticing and joyous to me finally curl up and die? Well, I assume you're at least somewhat literate, since you're operating your device of choice and clicking this video. So you already know that that's what we're going to be talking about, in real explicit detail. The money game. The first point probably isn't news to anyone. In fact, it's an inescapable reality of our current video gaming industry, and unfortunately capitalist society as a whole. Money talks, baby. Oh yeah, we're starting with good old-fashioned dirty greed. Have you noticed that as time goes on, you're unlocking less and less and less and less in your online shooty bang-bangs by actually playing the game? Is it starting to irk you that we once had games with fully realized progression systems where you'd unlock, through actual playtime and enjoyment, a variety of class options, weapon attachments, cosmetics, and other stuff that just made you feel that dopamine hit non-stop straight to the veins? Well, fear no more, little ones. Papa Greedy Publisher is here, and he's going to make sure to protect you from that scary, scary dopamine. No, no, no. You shouldn't be allowed to feel the rush of progression and increasing customization without forking out some money. It's for your own safety, after all. I mean, what else can we do to protect you from this horrible and addictive chemical? No, don't look at that. That's not important. That addiction is fine. This one is not. Move along now.
What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
If your brain still processes basic information, you're getting the gist of where I'm going. Greed has stripped down multiplayer experiences to the absolute most basic form. Take Overwatch 2 for an example. They've removed the terrible loot box system, at least at the time of recording. You know, the one that encourages gambling in children. And what do they replace it with? Ah, right, just hard cash. You don't earn jack shit anymore in Overwatch 2. No, your rank go up or your rank go down. That is the only real progression you get nowadays. But why would they do this? All these different developers and publishers, why would they take away your ability to organically earn things in their games and unlock cosmetics and other stuff that is shown to factually increase most people's enjoyment of a game? Yes, you got me. The answer is literally, and will always be, money. They're greedy bastards. They know that if you don't have any other way to unlock something, you'll feel pressured by that little crackhead inside your brain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you get addicted to crack? Did somebody get addicted to crack?
To toss them $50 here and there for a few meaningless cosmetics. But they're not meaningless, are they? Not to you. Because surprise, surprise, people like to display their individuality and personality through their online personas. So, easy money, suckers. You want access to the things that will allow you to differentiate your character from everyone else's? Cough up the dough, buddy boy. This isn't progression to me. It's not even close, and it simply doesn't give me the same dopamine hit that the good old days on Halo unlocking recon through VidMaster challenges did. The feeling of hitting max rank in Modern Warfare 2, the old one, and having access to every weapon in every loadout because I had earned it by playing the damned video game. I don't have fun in the long run if there is no tangible progression in a game. I simply get bored and I leave. I can only play the same maps over and over and over again with nothing changing so many times before I just don't care anymore. Before every angle and every tactic is old hat. But progression used to at least provide some incentive to keep playing. To try different crap and experiment. No more. I know what some of you have been shouting at your screen, but oh great and venerable law, what about season passes? Don't those offer you some sort of progression? Well, wouldn't you know it, little guy? I was about to get onto that right now. Season pass systems and FOMO. I don't think there is a single implementation of a system into video games that I hate more or will ever hate more than the season pass. I know, that was a really hard-hitting statement, wasn't it? But of course, you're wondering why I despise season passes with such a burning passion. You'll argue that at the very least they're better than predatory loot boxes and gambling systems. And yeah, you're not wrong. But that doesn't invalidate the new, and to me, much more infuriating issue that they create. Stick with me here. I know most of you are probably too young or too lazy to have ever worked a real job. Trust me, I feel you here. Work sucks, which is exactly why season passes also suck. Let me try to put this into simple words. I already have to work a job to survive and exist. And trust me, I loathe every fucking minute of it. I don't want a second job, or a third, or a fourth. That's what season passes are. See, publishers started feeling the gambling heat when it came to the loot boxes, so there needed to be a new system. One that was still just as predatory and unfun, but at the very least didn't encourage an entire new generation to become gambling fiends. don't worry, we have Twitch streamers to help with that anyway. Well, here comes Fortnite. Yeah, do the funny dance emotes. Woo! Fortnite arguably popularized the Season Pass system, where you'd buy a pass for each season and unlock stuff while playing a game that was, of course, free to play. Look, I'll give Epic and Fortnite shit until the day I die, but at the very least, you actually complete their pass relatively quickly. It's not the worst deal in the world. At the time, it was a big step up from loot boxes, especially if you knew you'd sink that time into the game anyway. The issue arose when more and more other games started adapting the same system. You see, when every fucking multiplayer game in existence implements a season pass, suddenly you're starting to run into an issue. Time is precious. At the very least, mine is. You might not value yours at all, but that's your problem. If you play more than one, or even two multiplayer games actively, then you suddenly experience this dreadful thing that is clearly 100% intended by the devs and publishers. Good old fear of missing out. Say you're a completionist and you play, I don't know, Destiny 2, and you like trying to keep up with content, getting everything in terms of items and such, and honestly enjoy hopping on with friends and grinding every so often. Now, imagine a season pass system suddenly shows up, and you now have a limited time every season to either play Destiny 2 enough for it to almost feel like work, or miss out on loads of shit. Worse though, it's shit you've paid for, that if you don't complete in the allotted time, is gone forever. Now I get it, the effect this has on many is the intended one, which is they start grinding like crazy and burning insane amounts of time on these games, because the fear is too strong. They need it. They need the time-limited cosmetics and items that will disappear into the void forever. They need the crack cocaine.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
I don't like feeling pressured to play a game when I don't want to. I don't like that stopping for a few months just to do other shit, you know, like real life shit, means you can miss a bunch of crap that will forever remain empty on that in-game tick box of stuff you want to collect. The only effect season passes have ever had for me is that they make me drop a game, almost permanently. I'll come back for large expansions and maybe play it when my friends are on, but I will lose literally all drive to go and run on the hamster wheel for measly rewards because, oh no, time is running out. It is the quickest way to sour me on a game that is otherwise an enjoyable experience, to somehow turn what should be the enjoyment of playing into the same feeling I get when I have deadlines for work. I don't want or need a second job, and any video game that tries to make itself into more of a job than a game for you, this shit isn't worth my time. Look, it would make sense if you only played one game, ever, but I don't. I enjoy variety. I like to hop between different engaging experiences all the time. But when every single multiplayer game starts implementing these trash passes, I would rather just not touch them at all. Even worse when they do shit like Valorant and Halo Infinite, which by the way I have uninstalled, so I won't even show footage of, where you have to do specific challenges to even level the pass. Challenges that force you into game modes you don't like, or to play with weapons you aren't good with, or even classes or heroes you dislike just to progress. That is atrocious. Not only is the game trying to stress you out with a time limit for unlocking crap you have paid for already, it is also making you play the game in ways that you might not enjoy at all. This mountain of shit is why I hate season passes. I rarely, if ever, spend money on them anymore, because I would rather dedicate my time to things and experiences that value that time. You want to see a few good examples of how this system can be implemented well? Look no further than the Master Chief Collection and Deep Rock Galactic. In the MCC, your season passes are all free and they never expire, so you can play the game whenever the fancy strikes you, and you'll just unlock stuff as you play. Lovely, simple, no FOMO, no stress, making me feel like my time would be better spent doing literally anything else. Deep Rock Galactic, again because you bought the game full price, offers every season's reward tree for free. But even better, if you miss any one season and don't get all the items, they then move from the season pass into the game's loot pool, so you can still unlock them with RNG and game currency over time. Would you look at that? Non-predatory seasonal content systems? Color me impressed. Remember how a long time ago, around the start of this video, I was talking about all of these positive social experiences I had on multiplayer games? Even when I was a child, interacting with people who had no reason to be cool, welcoming and embracing of me into their little friendship groups, yet still were? I have not had an experience similar to that in any multiplayer video game for what feels like a decade since. Except for co-op games, which I'm going to make a separate video on. Have you? I don't know what the fuck happened to gaming communities, but these days all you run into is toxic sweatlords on literally every damned video game. All that you ever see in text or voice chat is people screaming slurs at each other, raging at their own team, or just being massive toxic balls of feces all day, every day, in all their matches. So, around the start of this video, I was talking about all of these positive social experiences I had on multiplayer games. Even when I was a child, interacting with people who had no reason to be cool, welcoming and embracing of me into their little friendship groups, yet still were? I have not had an experience similar to that in any multiplayer video game for what feels like a decade since. Except for co-op games, which I'm going to make a separate video on. Have you? I don't know what the fuck happened to gaming communities, but these days all you run into is toxic sweatlords on literally every damned video game. All that you ever see in text or voice chat is people screaming slurs at each other, raging at their own team, or just being massive toxic balls of feces all day, every day, in all their matches. What happened? I'm asking genuinely on this one. I don't know. I can't begin to guess. Is it just the increased access of people to these games has allowed the dregs of humanity to wash in? Maybe. I've even had theories that maybe the creation of communities on stuff like Discord results in everyone who isn't a horrid little gremlin just finding personal communities dedicated around the games they play, where everyone is just overall nicer to each other. So all you're left with in public matchmaking in terms of people who actually use the in-game comms is honestly just the worst people you could ever imagine. I do a little trolling myself, and I'll be equally toxic at someone if they spend an entire round flaming me, but I don't go around flaming my team in ranked all day, or constantly seem to just be trying to start toxic arguments in every single match I'm in. It's just depressing. I live during a time where even with the infamous pre-game lobbies of people telling you they're going to fuck your mom, a majority of the people I'd meet would be quite alright. They'd be capable of having conversations. They wouldn't take the damn game so seriously. It's like people's ability to have fun has just fucking evaporated. They all want to be esports players, and they think they're hot shit, so they'll act that way in all the games they play. It just isn't fun anymore. Multiplayer game lobbies are in general so miserable that you have to wonder why any of these people in these matches are even bothering to play the games at all anymore. Like, unironically go the fuck outside and touch some grass. The dream of the esports wannabe. One trend I noticed as esports was becoming more and more of a big deal was that players lost their minds trying to emulate these people in professional teams. And the more they tried, the more they turned into the stinky sweatlords that infest online games nowadays. People who think they're gonna be the next Shroud. So they're on there clenching their cheeks as hard as possible, literally shitting and shaking the entire match. Because if they didn't win, then how could they possibly be having any fun? These are the people that will shout at you in unranked matches for picking non-meta characters, weapons, classes, etc. People who have warped their idea of fun to such a pathetic degree that even when they're like not platinum rank in whatever they're playing, they'll still act like they're in Grandmasters. I've always despised playing the meta. It's boring. You want to see how boring? Take a look at Overwatch, and how a stale and incredibly boring meta to watch and play pretty much kneecapped the competitive esports scene. Well, now you have millions of little troglodytes trying to mimic their favorite nerd from esports, and constantly playing only the meta shit, and raging anytime they lose while playing that meta. Or the even more terrible crime is committed of someone not caring about the meta at all. Blasphemy! How could you possibly be playing this game just to kick back and relax? What do you mean you're gonna play an off-meta character? What do you mean you're using that terrible gun for the fun of it? What is wrong with you? Unbearable. Of course, esports gave rise to another terrible thing for multiplayer gaming. And that is developers and publishers who see the money in that industry and suddenly want every goddamn game they ever make to be in esports. What does this mean? Well, suddenly, everything needs to be balanced. And the way terrible developers do this balancing, of course, is nerfing crap. Constantly nerfing anything that might be fun or interesting into the ground. Because if the game isn't balanced, then it can't have a competitive scene, right? You see this with pretty much every single modern shooter. You have dev teams constantly badly balancing and then rebalancing the game to a degree where it's almost comedic. One week, your main character might be S tier, and the literal next week he's Z tier because some professional nerds complain that they're broken. This also leads to balancing based on data, but that needs to be an entire video all on its own. Look at the blog post the Overwatch devs released recently to the time of this recording, where they discussed how they balance off data, such as hero pick and win rates. You want a quick and dirty example of why balancing off win rates is a terrible fucking idea? Because there can be a lot of bias in how someone reads data. For example, they could see a hero who has an incredibly high win rate. That means they have to be busted, right? So let's nerf the shit out of them. When in reality, they're a niche character who sucks. So nobody but the people who have mastered this character will ever pick them. Thereby, high win rate, yes, because the only people who can even play the crappy character are the ones who have learned them inside and out. The balancing rabbit hole is infinite, and it only gets worse all the time. So we're not going deeper into it without a tab of acid on hand. Instead, let's shift our focus to the problem with team games. Now, I'm no top player in the world at pretty much anything, but I'm also not total crap. This creates a massive problem for me. You see, skill-based matchmaking systems do in fact punish good performance, and I experience this in about every single multiplayer game I ever dedicate time to. I'll do good for a few matches, and suddenly I'm facing a team of absolute gods, while my teammates are doing their best to keep oxygen cycling in and out of their lungs. This incredibly aggressive type of matchmaking has only become more and more prevalent of late, with more people pointing it out and noticing it. In the past, I didn't mind it or even notice it as much, because games used to actually reward skilled play. I know, what an idea! Whether mechanical skill, map knowledge, if you were good at, say, Halo or COD, or any game really, you could feasibly carry your team on your back and still eke out a win. And it felt good. You felt like a Chad. The issue nowadays is that so many games are designed variety of humanity to watch having any fun. These are the people that will shout, I'll do good for a few matches, and suddenly I'm facing a team of absolute gods, while my teammates are doing their best to keep oxygen cycling in and out of their lungs. This incredibly aggressive type of matchmaking has only become more and more prevalent of late, with more people pointing it out and noticing it. In the past, I didn't mind it or even notice it as much, because games used to actually reward skilled play. I know, what an idea! Whether mechanical skill, map knowledge, if you were good at, say, Halo or COD, or any game really, you could feasibly carry your team on your back and still eke out a win. And it felt good. You felt like a Chad. The issue nowadays is that so many games are designed around forced teamwork to such an extent that if you have a single person not playing their role properly, you are doomed to failure. You're a good tank but your healers are bad? Welp, GG. You're a great healer but your DPS is incapable of killing any of the 4 different people using you as a makeshift pinata? Welp, GG. Compare this with any single match of Halo, where you can honestly be getting more than half the kills in a match by yourself, and still managing to at least stand a chance as a result of your own effort being rewarded. You can't do that anymore in most games, because design has shifted into these hero and role-based games that encourage esports-style team makeups. Even if you're good, most of the time you'll feel like the game is actively punishing you for having the goal to have above a 50% hit accuracy. How dare you? Multiplayer games, you're dead to me. There you have it, a jumble of thoughts and words made manifest. This is how I felt completely out of love with a genre that I was once honestly obsessed with. I don't know if I'll ever feel the same drive I once did to play these kinds of games again. Maybe I've just outgrown them, or maybe the plethora of issues I've spent this whole video outlining have so completely tainted the idea of multiplayer in my mind that there's nothing left for me to go back to. Whatever the case, I'll always cherish the thousands of combined hours I've spent finishing the fight in Halo, hitting sick op shots in Counter-Strike, pulling off insane feats of mobility in Titanfall 2, and the many friends and communities I became a part of along the way. The good games will always remain good, even if nothing worthy comes along to replace them. In the meanwhile, I'll be spending my time having fun in the oh so many co-op alternatives that offer far more enjoyment, far less toxicity, and way more bang for your buck. Oh yeah, you know what that means. Rock and stone. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, even though it was a very negative topic. I just really did want to rant about this for like nearly half an hour. It's one of those things that it's been building over time, you know? I keep playing multiplayer games and I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? Why do I hate this? Why am I not having fun? So I just compiled all my little like gripes and thoughts into a little video. I don't care if you agree. By the way, this isn't for you, this is my channel. Welcome, I am Lawrence. You get the joke now? Literally law. It's because I'm Lawrence and I write these stupid videos. Yeah, I'm a creative guy. And by that I mean, I am the law. But yeah, no, if you like the video, subscribe, leave a like, do all that dumb bullshit. I will make more videos now that I've started, on this channel especially, because, yeah, no, I have a lot of ideas. I do want to make more stuff. A lot of it will be way more positive stuff. I even mentioned in this video, I do want to make something about co-op games at some point. And I have a bunch of other, like, ideas for videos. So stick around. You don't know, but you might enjoy what I make from time to time, you know?
Yes, I taught that nerd something with my one single comment he didn't read. Yeah, I taught him.
Slaves produce a surplus which the master gets. Serfs produce a surplus which the lord gets. Employees produce a surplus which the employer gets. It's very simple. These are exploitative class structures because one class produces a surplus appropriated, distributed by another group of people, not the ones who produced it, which creates hostility, enmity, envy, anger, resentment, and all of the problems you can lump under the heading class struggle.
The following is a conversation with Richard Wolff, one of the top Marxist economists and philosophers in the world. This is a heavy topic. In general, and for me personally, given my family history in the Soviet Union, in Russia, and in Ukraine. Today, the words Marxism, socialism, and communism are used to attack and to divide, much more than to understand and to learn. With this podcast, I seek the latter. I believe we need to study the ideas of Karl Marx, as well as their various implementations throughout the 20th and the 21st centuries. And in general, we need to both steelman and to consider seriously the ideas we demonize, and to challenge the ideas we dogmatically accept as true, even when doing so is unpleasant and at times dangerous. This is the Lex Friedman Podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Richard Wolff. Let's start with a basic question, but maybe not so basic after all. What is Marxism? What are the defining characteristics of Marxism as an economic and political theory and ideology?
Well, the simplest way to begin a definition would be to say it's the tradition that takes its founding inspiration from the works of Karl Marx. But because these ideas that he put forward spread as fast as they did and as globally as they did, literally it's 140 years since Marx died, and in that time his ideas have become major types of thinking in every country on the earth. If you know much about the great ideas of human history, that's an extraordinary spread in an extraordinarily short period of historical time. And what that has meant, that speed of spread and that geographic diversity, is that the Marxian ideas interacted with very different cultural histories, religious histories, and economic conditions. So the end result was that the ideas were interpreted differently in different places at different times. And therefore, Marxism, as a kind of first flush definition, is the totality of all of these very different ways of coming to terms with it. For the first roughly 40, 50 years, Marxism was a tradition of thinking critically about capitalism. Marx himself, that's all he really did. He never wrote a book about communism. He never wrote a book really about socialism either. His comments were occasional, fragmentary, dispersed. What he was really interested in was a critical analysis of capitalism. And that's what Marxism was, more or less, in its first 40 or 50 years. The only qualification of what I just said was something that happened in Paris for a few weeks. In 1871, there was a collapse of the French government, consequent upon losing a war to Bismarck's Germany, and in the result was something called the Paris Commune. The working class of Paris rose up, basically took over the function of running the Parisian economy and the Parisian society. And Marx's people influenced by Marx, were very active in that commune, in the leadership of the commune. And Marx wasn't that far away. He was in London. These things were happening in Paris. You know, that's an easy transport even then. And for a short time, very short, Marxism had a different quality. in addition to being a critique of capitalism, it became a theory of how to organize society differently. Before that had only been implicit. Now it became explicit. What is the leadership?
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Lex Friedman, for Richard Wolff, Marxism and Communism, Lex Friedman Podcast 295. Thank you so much for the excellent insight about communism. I have already heard some new things that I didn't know. And it's good to hear something that isn't just repeated by the new generation 5 times and, declared new. Somebody who actually has some original thoughts. Thank you so much. Let's go back into the history, and we say that we have liked and subbed to your channel. Let's go to the display capture, excuse me. You go to the display capture and liked and subbed to your channel, right? We're going to go back and we look at the history here, and I want to say why I stopped literally law. Thank you so much for the excellent content for my stream. Why I stopped loving multiplayer games. How Britain started the Arab-Israeli conflict from Free Documentary. I thought I had subbed to that, but thanks. I'd like to sub to your channel a second time. It just erased my and then the Great War. Thank you so much for the excellent content for my stream. How Zionists came to Palestine under British protection. And yeah, a lot of our common problems are straight from the British monarchy, including Israel-Palestine and maybe the impending World War. Lay that right at the feet of the rich white man. And I know no one else will say in the world, because everyone in the world is white or whatever. Not everyone in the world is white. I'm kidding. But most of the rich people in the world are white, so you'll never hear this opinion. But I really believe that Zionists came to Palestine under British protection, particularly because this guy's getting 1 million hits from 2 years ago. I mean, mainly. And also, this stuff. So thank you so much for the excellent content for my stream. I just want to give credit to where credit is due. I'm about to go to bed here in about 20 minutes. And we have cut this down to about 8 hours a day. But I mean, that's what it takes to record. So 8 hours of recording each day is about a full-time job, I'd say. So thank you for hanging around, guys. I love you guys. We'll come back here in just a minute.
Of the Paris Commune going to do, and why, and in what order. In other words, governing, organize a society. But since it only lasted a few weeks, the French army regrouped, and under the leadership of people who were very opposed to Marx, they marched back into Paris, took over, killed a large number of the communards, as they were called, and deported them to islands in the Pacific that were part of the French Empire at the time. The really big change happens in Russia in 1917. Now you have a group of Marxists, Lenin, Trotsky, all the rest, who are in this bizarre position to seize a moment. Once again, a war, like in France, disorganizes the government, throws the government into a very bad reputation because it is the government that loses World War I, has to withdraw, as you know, all of that, and the government collapses, and the army revolts. And in that situation, a very small political party, Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, splits under the pressures of all of this into the Bolshevik and Menshevik divisions. Lenin, Trotsky, and the others are in the Bolshevik division. And to make a long story short, he's in exile. His position, Lenin's position, gets him deported because he says Russian workers should not be killing German workers. I mean, this is a war of capitalists who are dividing the world up into colonies. Russian people should not kill and should not die for such a thing. As you can expect, they arrest him and they throw him out. Interestingly, in the United States, the comparable leader at that time of the Socialist Party here, as you know, there was no Communist Party at this point, that comes later. The head of the Socialist Party, a very important American figure named Eugene Victor Debs, makes exactly the same argument to them. The Americans should not fight in the war. He's in the past, has nothing to do with Lenin. I don't even know if they knew of each other. But he does it on his own. He gets arrested and put in jail here in the United States. By the way, he runs for president from jail and does very well. Really, very well. Remarkable. And he's the inspiration for Bernie Sanders, if you see the link. Although he had much more courage politically than Bernie has.
That's really interesting. I'd love to return to that link maybe later.
Yes.
History rhymes.
Yes, complicated story. Anyway, the importance in terms of Marxism is that now this seizure of power by a group of Marxists, that is a group of people inspired by Marx, developing what you might call a Russian, even though there were differences among the Russians too, but a Russian interpretation. This now has to be transformed from a critique of capitalism into a plan, at least, what are you going to do in the Soviet Union. And a lot of this was then trial and error. Marx never laid any of this out. Probably wouldn't have been all that relevant if he had, because it was 50 years earlier in another country, etc. So what begins to happen, and you can see how this happens then more later in China and Cuba, Vietnam and Korea and so on, is that you have kind of a bifurcation. Much of Marxism remains chiefly the critique of capitalism, but another part of it becomes a set, and they differ from one to the other, a set of notions of what an alternative post-capitalist society ought to look like, how it ought to work. And there's lots of disagreement about it, lots of confusion. And I would say that that's still where it is. You have a tradition now that has these two major wings, critique of capitalism, notion of the alternative, and then a variety of each of those, and that would be the framework in which I would answer. That's what Marxism is about. Its basic idea, if you had to have one, is that human society can do better than capitalism, and it ought to try.
And then we can start to talk about what we mean by capitalism.
Fine.
So we'll look at the critique of capitalism on one side, but maybe stepping back, what do you think Marx would say if you just looked at the different implementations of the ideas of Marxism throughout the 20th century, where his ideas that were implicit were made explicit? Would he shake his head? Would he enjoy some of the parts of the implementations? How do you think he would analyze it?
Well, he had a great sense of humor. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at his writing, but he had an extraordinary sense of humor. So my guess is he would deploy his humor in answering this question too. He would say some of them are inspiring, some of his interpretations of his work, and he's very pleased with those. Others are horrifying, and he wishes somehow he could erase the connection between those things and the lineage they claim from him, which he would. There's a German word, I don't know if these languages, you speak the other language, there's a wonderful German word called FFXIITZA. And it's stronger than the word refuse. If you want to refuse something, but with a real strong emphasis, is a German way of saying, I don't want to do that. And he would talk, in philosophical terms, because remember, he was a student of philosophy. He wrote his doctoral thesis on ancient Greek philosophy and all the rest. He would wax philosophical and say, the ideas you put out are a little bit like having a child. You have a lot of influence, but the child is his own or her own person and will find his or her own way. And these ideas, once they're out there, go their own way.
And as you said, there's a particular way that this idea spread. The speed at which it spread throughout the world made it even less able to be sort of stabilized and connected back to the origins of where the idea came from.
The only people who ever really tried that were the Russians after the Revolution, because they occupied a position for a while, not very long, but they occupied a position for a while in which I mean, it was exalted, right? There had been all these people criticizing capitalism for a long time, even the Marxists ever since mid-century. And these were the first guys who pulled it off. They made it. And so that there was a kind of presumption around the world. Their interpretation must be kind of the right one, because look, they did it. And so for a while, they could enunciate their interpretation, and it came to be widely grasped as something which, by the way, gets called in the literature official Marxism. The very idea that you would put that adjective in front of Marxism, or Soviet Marxism, or Russian Marxism. There were these words that where the adjective was meant to somehow say, kind of, this is the canon. You can depart from it. This is the canon. Before the Russian Revolution, there was no such thing. And by the 1960s, it was already disparate, it was gone. But for a short time, 30, 40 years, it was a kind of... And the irony is, particularly here in the United States, where the taboo against Marxism kicks in right after World War II, is so total in this country that I, for example, through most of my adult life, have had to spend a ridiculous amount of my time simply explaining to American audiences that the Marxism they take as canonical is that old Soviet Marxism, which wasn't the canon before 1917 and hasn't been since at least the 1960s. But they don't know. It's not that they're stupid and it's not that they're ignorant. It's that, well, the ignorance maybe, but I mean, it's not a mental problem. It's the taboo shut it down. And so all of the reopening that in a way recaptures what went before and develops it in a new direction, they just don't know.
Nevertheless, it's a serious attempt at making the implicit ideas explicit. The Russians, the Soviets at the beginning of the 20th century made a serious attempt at saying, okay, beyond the critique of capitalism, how do we actually put the system? And so in that sense, not at a high level, but at a detailed level, it's interesting to look at those particular schools. Maybe
right, because for example, just to take your point one step further, you really cannot understand the Cuban Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, Vietnamese, and the others, because each of them is a kind of response, let's call it, to the way the Soviets did it. Are you going to do it that way? Well, yes and no is the answer. This we will do that way, but that we're not going to do. And the difference is huge. But you could find a thread, I can do that for you if you want, in which all of them are in a way reacting. They
to
are
the original.
Yes, very much so.
Like maybe most of rock music is reacting to the Beatles and the Stones.
That's something like that.
Can you speak to the unique elements of the various schools of that Soviet Marxism? We got Leninism, Trotskyism, Stalinism, maybe even let's expand out to Maoism. So maybe I can speak to sort of Leninism. And please tell me if I'm saying dumb things. There's I think for Lenin, there was an idea that there would be a small sort of vanguard party, like a small controlling entity that's like wise, able to do the central planning decisions. Then for Stalinism, one interesting, so Stalin's implementation of all of this, one interesting characteristic is to move away from the international aspect of the ideal of Marxism to make it all about nationalism, the strength of nation. And then, so Maoism is it's different in that it's focused on agriculture and rural. And then Trotskyism, I don't know except that it's anti-Stalin.